Tim Neer is a New York-based long-term procurement and logistics specialist. He spent 14 years in leadership roles doing procurement and logistics for InBev and Anheuser-Busch. And since leaving ABI 5 years ago, he's been advising large global consumer product companies as well as helping smaller startups in the food and beverage space with their procurement and logistics operations. So Tim is going to teach you all about how to maximize your procurement and logistics efforts. Take it away.
Thanks. Thanks, Chris. Hey, it's great for everybody to be here this morning. This is a fantastic session. So I'm really glad to be here and looking forward to the rest of the presentations. They've been great so far. What I'm going to talk about is we'll do a little introduction. We'll talk about what is purchasing and why do we care, because a lot of people don't care. So it's really, really important, and we're going to talk about why. The 5 rights of purchasing, source versus buy, and some ideas on how to source, right? That's a key question. It's one of the key questions I want you to walk out of today is what is sourcing versus what is buying, and why do I have to think about it in that way? Some key watch-outs, and then if we got some time, some Q&As, and I'll make myself available throughout the day. Please come and talk to me. So, introductions. That's me, Tim Neer. Like Chris said, I've worked in procurement for basically my whole career. Both in beer, other beverages like PepsiCo, Quaker Oats when they had Gatorade, and I help out a lot of companies in the beer space doing this type of work. Dave is my partner back there. Dave had some experience launching a brand globally called Stella Artois when we were on the same management team at InBev. Pretty cool. And then Tom O'Grady, our CFO, who was previously the CFO of Long Trail, and on our executive team as CFO of InBev in the United States. So that's us. What is purchasing and why do we care? Well, purchasing, who does it, by the way? Who does purchasing in the room? Show of hands. All right. Every company buys stuff. You've got people that do it, and then you've got the process of actually acquiring goods and services for your organization. Some people do it well. Some people do it as an afterthought. Some people do it because they have to, but everybody has to do it. We all had to buy a hotel room, I suppose, or a taxi on the way here. Everybody does it. It's part of everything that we do. Why is it important to you? It usually represents greater than 70% of your cost of inputs. Everything else is people, maybe leases, et cetera, but it's 70% of your cost. Why is it important? Changes in these costs, good or bad, flow directly to the bottom line. We saw earlier today that the EBITDA, if you save $1 or you cost yourself an extra $1 through a purchase of a good, it flows directly to your bottom line. So the impacts are very real, they're very significant, and they happen immediately. So if you do this well, it can be a competitive advantage. If you don't, you can add a lot of risk to your business that you didn't have before. You can't brew and sell beer without buying the items, and the most expensive one is the one that doesn't show up. Anybody had a situation where you needed to brew something and the material just wasn't there? Or you had something in the tanks and you need to package it and the packaging's not there? It clogs up your whole operation. So you need to make sure you have a methodology to make those decisions to make sure everything's there when you need it at the right time or in the right place. A lot more to come in the 5 rights of purchasing section. Quality, reliability, agility of your suppliers, they need to be antes to the game. So a lot of suppliers might come to you and say, hey, we're going to have the best quality. That should be table stakes. Of course you got to have the best quality. If you're not, I'm not going to use you. If you say you do, and then you prove that you don't, I'm not going to use you again, because you've introduced risk to my business that otherwise I wouldn't have if you'd actually said you had good quality. Agility, sometimes you need stuff you didn't know. You need the rush load. You need to have that new brand packaging that was just redesigned, that you're at the end of your timeline and you just need it in. So suppliers need to be agile in supporting you. So let me ask a question. Do you think you spend enough time in your business thinking about these things? And the answer from all the brewers we've talked to over the past several years is almost unanimously no. You don't. But if you don't, there's a consequence that is significant and severe. So part of my message today is please think about these things and make sure that you've got them covered so you can actually go and focus on the rest of your business, brewing and selling fantastic products. All right? Second question, do you think you're getting your fair share of value from suppliers? In those supplier relationships, who is getting the value? Is it split 50-50? If you can answer that question, you might come back with the realization that maybe your suppliers are getting more value out of the relationship than you. And that may be a dynamic you want to change. Okay, typical brewery, and this is for a brewery that, it's fairly small but has some packaging. Maybe they've got a bunch of products. This is what it typically looks like. Looks familiar, right? So you've got 2-row malt, you've got glass, you've got a bunch of different hops, maybe some cans. You just maybe introduced a can package, maybe you're hand packing it, maybe you've got a small line. This is what your cost item looks like. Now, typically when we talk to brewers, what we find is they're working really hard on procurement in 1 or 2 of these categories. They might know a lot about hops. Almost all of you know a lot about hops because it's beer, right? It's sexy, it's unique, it's grown, you go out and you do your tastings, and it's really, really neat stuff. I myself was the largest hop buyer in the world for several years. I know, it's cool, right? But it's down here somewhere. A lot of you might spend a bit of time on malt, but you probably don't spend a ton of time on glass except dealing with, hey, can I get the glass from the supplier, and what are my truckloads, and what sort of timelines are there? And you certainly don't spend a lot of time down here. Your labels, your crowns, all that stuff that, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, is so important. Because if you don't have it, you can't make your product. But it's not fun, right? So what I'm telling you is it's all important. I'm also going to tell you to look at it like this. Make your spend analysis actionable, which means cluster it the way a supplier thinks of it, not the way you think of it in your brewery. So if we take that same data from the previous page, what we find is, in this particular operation, hops is the biggest category. This operation, like many of you, spends more money collectively on hops than anything else. That's a surprise to most. And you might have a different portfolio here, but the idea is, are you spending the time on your number one items from a financial standpoint, or are you practicing with your pet categories? Suppliers are going to look at you this way. A hop supplier is going to say, I'm selling all these hops, or I could sell all these hops to that brewery. Not hop 1, hop 2, hop 3, pellet, extract, leaf, the collective business. So make sure you structure yourself to think about what's the total buy, but from a category perspective, so you can actually have a good discussion with the suppliers. Now, the 5 rights of purchasing. So this is basic stuff, but I think it's really important to consider, and I review this often when I look at the purchasing elements. What are the 5 rights of purchasing? The right quality, with the right quantity, at the right price, at the right place, at the right time. Pretty basic stuff. But when you get into it, you actually see there's a lot of detail behind that. The right quality. How do you know your quality is right? It is one of your most important considerations. Bad quality introduced into your process can destroy your brand. So how do you know? Key questions I would ask yourself, and you may want to think about this, is do you have a definition of quality for key items? And key items that are important to your process, not just in terms of big expenditures. Do you check quality routinely according to a program? And routine is important here. Every time a load arrives, every time a press run is done, you make it your own routine, but you make it a routine. Make sure you know. What do you have in place in case of quality failures? It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Be ready for it. Get ahead of it. Do the fire drills. Practice. Pretend that you've got a bad load of grain in. Pretend that you've got a bottle with a wire edge finish. And make sure you know what to do in that situation. Practice. And if somebody asks you to prove it, Could you prove it? Make sure you got this covered. It's number one for a reason. It's table stakes, but you've got to prove it. A supplier that comes in and says, hey, we've got good quality and we're going to stand by you, probably isn't going to be good enough if somebody has an issue with one of your products out in the market. It's going to be your brand that gets affected. So make sure you nail this one. The right quantity. How do you plan your buys? Let me ask a question. Do you typically use a batch order and make your orders based upon that? Or do you forecast your production and then buy based on your forward forecast? A lot of people do this batch order piece, which is great. It says, I'm going to do so much beer over the next 6 weeks, and I've got a little system, maybe an Excel, maybe a little tool, maybe an MRP, that tells me how much I need of each item. What that does is it gives you low inventory risk. I know I need 1,000 cases of this, so I'm going to buy 1,000 cases of that thing. But it gives you low scale effect because you can't cluster your buy in a way across the forecast horizon. So you do descale yourself. You want to have preferably decreasing price with increasing volume. Makes sense. But so many people forget that. I see many breweries that start off with a price for something and they grow 25%, 50%, double, and their prices don't change. Is that happening to you? It happens all the time. Stability. Nobody likes negative price surprises. Nobody likes surprises at all, but a positive price surprise is better to handle than a negative one. So that's what the buyer's thinking. The seller. The seller first needs to win your business. It's so hard. It's so hard. They need to invest to do it. They need to invest in time. They need to come and visit you. They need to send product. It needs to work. They need to deal with delivery issues. They need to deal with everybody else who is trying to sell you the same thing. It's so, so hard. So the moment that you buy something new, or the moment that you are considering changing what you buy and who you buy it from is critically important from a seller point of view. The losing the business, it's so easy to do. There's always somebody else that's going to come in and supply it. They're terrified of losing that business that they've invested so much in gaining. So remember that. They want to get the highest price while maintaining the business. They want to upsell to more profitable items or specifications. They want to sell you the extra services. The expedited loads will cover the inventory for you at this price, etc. They want to mitigate cost risks by passing it on to you. Conversations like this price has changed, so we need to change our price as a result, that come faster to you than when the prices actually go down for a commodity. They want to nurture the relationship to create a barrier for others. And they want to become irreplaceable to protect against this. So that's the seller's view. The right time and place, this one's a little, I guess, easier to manage than some of the others. How do you really know when you need to order? Okay, so just make sure you have a process that's robust. How long is the lead time and is it reliable? What transport concerns exist? Particularly this year, there's been a lot of pressure on transportation here in the United States, so a lot more risk has been introduced into the transportation system this year because of high capacity utilization in trucks. Develop an inventory and ordering strategy by key item and include in that strategy safety stock and safety time. If you know something's always going to be a little bit late or has a risk, build in some extra time into your ordering plan to compensate for that. Execute your sales and operations planning I discussed earlier religiously. Okay, source versus buy. Buying. Buying is what you do every day to get the stuff to your operation. It's a transactional day-to-day activity. Sourcing, on the other hand, is the decision that's made on who is going to be your supplier, from which then you will buy. All right? It's a decision versus a transaction. So from a supplier point of view, I want you to remember this is one of the key takeaways. The decision for them to be your supplier is a critical and long-term decision. And you need to look at it that way to get the best benefit from that discussion. The buying is just running the business after you've decided who's going to be your supplier. It's not so important to the supplier, except that you got to do the transactional activities, making your invoices, paying them, getting the product on time. But the decision's already made. The key point here is don't buy until you've sourced. And I'm going to tell you how to think about sourcing. In our business, Agrowgate, we've got a 9-step model in how to source. And I won't go through every piece of this. But what I'm going to tell you is it's important to understand what you need, understand your requirements, like really understand them. If you need half pallets, if you need pallets delivered a Tuesday night at 11 p.m., make sure you get that nailed down. Understand your suppliers. So many people miss this because you've already got suppliers calling you, and you know who is the potential supplier. You think of hops or cans or bottles or corrugated trays or shipping or whatever. Really make sure you understand who the supply base is, and you're not missing anybody. Define the sourcing strategy. What am I going to do? What does a sourcing strategy mean? I'm going to talk about that in another page here. Then you go out to market, okay? Don't do any of that stuff after you go to market. Once you go to market and ask suppliers for pricing, and if you don't have your requirements right and don't include the right suppliers, you've missed the boat on the potential opportunity. You may limit yourself to 1 or 2 suppliers or 1 or 2 items and not get the advantage of the scale. And then once you do that, you make your decisions and you operate the business. Porter's 5 forces model. Some of you are smiling. You've maybe seen this before. Who is familiar with this model? Who's heard of it before? A handful of you. Okay. What this is a way for you to very quickly understand in any supplier marketplace what their landscape looks like. What are the pressures on your suppliers in the context of selling to you as you're trying to define what your sourcing strategy could be? And I'm going to go through a couple of quick examples here, but essentially, in the middle, you've got category competition. Oh, the easy ones are this. Buyer power, for a small brewer, it's almost always low. With the packaging and raw material suppliers you're working with, they're typically high. High power to use against you. A few $1 million, maybe 10, 20, $100 million if you're a decent sized brewer, versus in most cases, multi-billion-dollar suppliers. So by its nature, that means the power in the discussion, and they'll do it nicely, is going to flow from you to them. Remember what I said about, are you getting your fair share of the value of the relationship? By the nature of this, more of the fair share of the value will flow to your suppliers than to you. Category competition is a factor that helps you mitigate some of that pressure. Now, who knows an example where there's a lot of category competition? Just shout out an example of a raw material or packaging. Corrugated trays. Great example. Everybody does it. They're local, nothing fancy. What's a category where there is low competition? Cans. I heard cans. Great example. Just a very small handful of manufacturers of cans. High barriers to entry to make a can. So you've got to have a different strategy with them, maybe more of a partnership strategy, versus a corrugated example where you can have very easy switching costs and maybe want to go out to the market and bid all the time. Threat of new entries. What is an example of a threat of new entry in the can marketplace? Think of it from a supplier's point of view. You've got low competition. What can you do to help mitigate the effect of low competition? What are the new entries? Well, that's a stumper, I think. Couple examples. Are you making the decision of launching cans versus bottles? That's a meaningful conversation. The can suppliers want you to do cans, the bottle suppliers want you to do bottles. Third, a new entry, right? Use that in your discussion. Imagine how different your discussion with your can supplier would be from, I can't get 16-ounce cans because they're out of stock, to, I think I'm going to switch to bottles. Totally different conversation. Threat of substitution. Any other thoughts on what a threat of substitution might be? It's similar to the threat of new entries. New entries is more another supplier. Substitution is more another format, another way to achieve the same goal. So for a hop, it might be, I'm not going to use that hop, I'm going to use this other hop. Or even better, I'm not going to have my formula to require me to use only one hop. I'm going to have a formula that is built to allow me to interchange between 2 or 3 different varieties. See the difference? Once you do that, now you can understand where the supplier's head's at, and you can actually have different conversations about how you're going to buy from them that will lead to different decisions. Okay. That's a little strategy piece there. So key item number 2 to keep in mind. Always understand the supplier's point of view. Use that 5 forces model to try to understand what their vulnerabilities are and what your vulnerabilities are. Key watch-outs. Forgetting about sourcing and only buying. We talked about that. Supplier solvency risk. Make sure your suppliers are going to be around. There's a lot, especially in some of these high competitive marketplace, like corrugated, they're not so healthy. And if you're counting on them to supply you, you need to make sure you understand that risk. The underlying commodity risk. Who's had experience this year in increasing commodity prices and therefore an increasing impact on your cost structure? So every hand should go up, right? Everybody has this. Who knows how to handle it? Who knows how to mitigate the impact of that so that more of the fair share of that cost goes to your supplier and less comes to you, right? So things to consider here are, as you do your sourcing, have a formula so you understand. If aluminum price is going to double, what's that mean for my cans? If fuel price is going to go up or down, what does that mean for my transportation? So on and so forth. So you don't get surprised. Forecast risk, buying too much or too little. Who has inventory of packaged items that you can't use anymore? 2, I don't believe it. You probably all have stuff sitting in the back of the warehouse that you can't use anymore because you changed the brand, or you don't sell that product, or you had seasonal product left over you couldn't sell, or whatever. So make sure you really understand your forecast risk and build your inventory plan associated with that. Higher risk, buy less forward volume. Reputational risk. We heard in the earlier presentation that your brand stands for something. Make sure you don't jeopardize that reputation by buying in a way that is adverse to your brand. If you say you're going to buy from local providers, you better buy from local providers, right? If you say you're only going to buy the best quality ingredients, you better be able to prove it, right? A lot of people forget this and then they get caught. So make sure that your buying strategy ties into your strategy of your business. Environmental, this is a good habit. Encourage your suppliers to be environmentally conscious. Do it yourself. Try to waste less. Don't throw out a lot of items if you can. Don't be satisfied with packaging or raw materials that you cannot run, and therefore you have to throw it. Challenge your suppliers, not just for cost, but for environmental reasons. Authenticity, similar to reputation, stick with your brand principles and source in the same way. Supplier capacity, if you think there's an item where there's not enough capacity, 1, you should know. should ask the suppliers and make sure you understand. 2, if you think there's a risk, build it in to your deal. Make sure you're at the front of the line. So many people forget that. And what happens is you end up at the back of the line. Build it in at the point that you're making the decision who's going to be your supplier. I will award you this business if you will make sure I never get stiffed on 16-ounce cans. Write it in before you sign. For example, transportation risk, make sure you can get it there. Risk has gone up here and continues to be tough this year and into next year compared to previous years. And building the right service level or not into your deal. So if there's something you really need, build it in before you sign the contract. So those are some key watchouts for you. So I think I'm going to pause there. We got a minute left for questions. Chris, I'm happy to entertain any. Also, happy to chat with anybody after the presentation.
Round of applause for Tim. All right, so we are just about out of time, but we do have time for one question if somebody has it. Otherwise, you can grab Tim after the crash course. All right, Tim, thank you very much. I appreciate it.